Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Citizen Bear. This is a podcast discussing some of the topics in my book, The Demonstrative Citizen, The Revelation of Two Dragons. At some point, there will be a follow-up to this book, but I'm working on it. But I thought with a lot of the things going on in today's world, I'd like to take some of the great themes from this book and really kind of address them and talk about them in terms of today's world, because shockingly, there are a lot of parallels. When I wrote this, I looked down the road at a very dystopian idea to send a message about very real topics in a fictitious story, and it's good yarn, but and a lot of deeper meanings, a lot of layers to the book. But I'm finding that many of them have become very real in our world today, and I think it's great to sit back and put some of them out there and put some opinion out there on it, and maybe start a larger conversation. In any case. Today I want to talk to you, and this is going to be the first part, so it might not be as long, but we're going to start a series of 2, 3, maybe a little longer episodes on World War III. And a lot of people are out there talking about it today, but I want to make some very unique points and kind of tee up the rest of the sessions and get some great ideas out there and things that we all should maybe want to think about. I know a lot of people this is kind of in a lot of people's faces. It's in the backdrop of our lives right now. It's a terrible thing to think about, and I'd like to think that we can avoid that, and we should be able to as a world and as a society. But there are many reasons why people are pushing forward with this, or it seems to continue to haunt us, and I think it's important to start this conversation. But before we get started, I want to go back to this little piece that I've been doing on calling bull, and I've taken a couple of strong swipes at the far left, and deservingly so, and some other people, and especially some of our leaders. But I also want to take a little bit of a poke at I did a section on faith, and I very strongly have my own faith, and I want to push back on some of my own faith and some of my peers in my faith today in the calling bull segment. And I think one of the things that I found frustrating, and I saw a couple of pieces pop up in the news, and religious leaders speaking out on a couple of different topics, and I found it a little disconcerting. I know they meant well, and I'm sure they didn't mean to go as far as they did or to raise a red flag, but it's a trend that I've seen in the micro and in the macro, and I think we've gotten to a point that we should be very careful about being so absolute in our thinking, and we've lost a little perspective as we've become a little condescending, and that's not everyone, I understand, but we should all guard against this, and this is somewhat in keeping with one of the last episodes I did on fine lines and being absolute in some of our thinking, and we should be a little cautious about that. Maybe we should be a little less concerned with what other people are doing wrong, and maybe be a little concerned on what each of us needs to be doing ourselves. I don't think we should ever find ourselves in such a hubris position that we are defining who is worthy of God's covenant, His grace, and His kingdom. And I sometimes see this out there in the world where people are pretty high and mighty about defining other people's sin. We are all sinners. We are all imperfect, and we should always keep that in mind. We should have a little humility that we are only worthy because of God's grace. And it is important for us to come unto God humbly and confess our sins and work to be better. But it takes time. It is a journey, and we should honor everyone's journey there, and it is our duty to bring people to Christ, not push them away. You know, let me start over with that. Pope John Paul II, who I have a great deal of admiration for, once said, "We do not come down from the cross." And while I understand his meaning in this, and I know that he was trying to tell people that we don't compromise on our religious imperatives and and the Word of God and its teachings. But we also have to remember the reason we don't come down from the cross is because we were never on it. And it is an important distinction. We don't get to superimpose ourselves in Christ's place on the cross. We do not get to be the judge of the quick and the dead. That is for Christ. Our job is to go out and bring people to Christ, and to go out amongst the sinners, to go out to people and help them understand Christ's teaching and understand his covenant and bring people to him. We must not cross the line and then pass final judgment on people. And that's how it sounds sometimes, that people are so unworthy. I'm not sure when one particular sin got to be worse than another particular sin. I mean, I suppose under the law in our society, we stack those up, where murder is far worse than, some other crime like, parking or something, getting a parking ticket. But in God's judgment, I don't know that, we are capable of passing that kind of judgment, because frankly, while we can define the sin, we can define the enormity of the crime, it is not always easy for us to understand what else God takes into account during his judgment on people, and how he will pass grace and the people who enter into his covenant, and how they grow and start fresh and begin to do better in life and in his teachings. And a great deal of what we're facing in our world today, and when we talk about World War III, we are talking about the right and the ability to freely choose to enter into Christ's covenant. And that's what we are doing. Entering into his covenant is a personal choice, and it is a personal relationship with God. And that is something that we work and grow and nurture. And hopefully we become better and with a fresh perspective in life. And so harsh judgment is I'm not sure is always something that we should be doing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't identify sin, because we should. And sometimes we even need to protect ourselves from evil. We need to protect ourselves from those who are very, very sinful and really don't want to hear about it. And we can be judged by the company we keep. But we should never really write people off. And as I talked about in Faith in the Republic, one of the sessions on that, or segments on that, I think people are very much founded in, love or hate, and they've chosen a founding principle, and they nurture it. And I think that, no matter how small that ember is in faith or love, when we have people, even if it's misguided and they don't understand, and they're working on it, no matter how small that ember is that they hold on to as being founded in faith, we want to nurture that. We want to help that flame burn, and we want them to come to Christ, and with that ember burning to grow in their love and to grow in faith then, and enter into Christ's covenant and enter into that personal relationship. And I think there needs to be a greater emphasis on that than just piously passing judgment all the time and expecting people to live up to our standards. Well, you don't really have to meet my standards. You have to really meet Christ's standards. So that's something where, we can kind of have a rough measure, but we should be encouraging, and we should be good, and we should put our arms around many, many people who I think get left behind and are left unseen and unheard in our world. And we have to be careful that we don't fall into the trap of the Pharisees when we do this. Even the most unseen and unheard and misguided who are founded in love are important. They are the souls who could very well tip the scales to favor good in a better world if we embrace them. And it's an important idea. So let's go on in considering and really step back and look in the mirror and take an evaluation of ourselves in our faith in these very, very difficult times. And make sure that we are not taking part in divisiveness and driving our society into more fragmentation. Let's be more unifying. Let's see the good in people, because trust me, there are plenty of people who are founded in hate. So let us find the good and embrace them. Moving on, I want to begin this topic of talking about World War III, and kind of a beginning. And I think the first question is, how does this war begin? When does this war begin? Historically, you can look back over other wars and other major conflicts. World War II is probably the most recent world war that we can look to, and we can kind of, large-scale conflict, and we can kind of look at its evolution. But the starts of war can be somewhat elusive. And I want to make a point with that because many would agree that in 1941, World War II was well on its way. The world was at war. The United States was brought into the war, and this is when everybody was really in it. But I think many would say that in 1939, the world was very much at war. Europe, the French and the English had engaged Germany over Poland. Germany had already expanded into other countries and was now, including Poland, and was now expanding into Western Europe and kind of closing out France. And it was starting that process at least. And, this is when the war really started to, World War II started to take shape. But a lot of others might say the election of Hitler and the ascension of power by Mussolini was really a Formula 4 war, that it kind of started in there. And others really could say that, the riots and the civil unrest in Germany and in Italy that brought Hitler to power, and a lot of the decisions that were made around that, and how these different parties, the communists and later the fascists and nationalists and all these different people, Democratic Republic people, all were in conflict, and there were street fights and other things long before Hitler came to power. He actually got arrested. That's where he started writing Mein Kampf, was over trying to overthrow the government in one town. So, I mean, this was going on. There was a lot of, what you'd call uprising and bordering insurrection throughout the country over inflation and difficult financial times. And there were very difficult times in Germany. And we can trace, the roots of World War II and many other wars to the end of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles there. And this is a difficult thing to accept, that we may have laid the seeds for World War II and many other conflicts in the world as we started to reshape the world post-World War I. I suppose all wars have their triggers. It doesn't really always matter that there's some reason, and people have meanings and deeper meanings and hidden agendas that start conflicts. And more often than not, as those wars come on, they become conflagrations where they start to take on their own fuel and oxygen, and they fight because they're fighting, and the war has started, and I think the only way out of them is to really fight their way through them and to exhaustion. And by the end of them, I think sometimes we forget how it got started. But sometimes the reasons are very important, and we're fighting for some larger topic in truth, not just conquering Europe like Hitler wanted to or something like that, being the master of Europe. And I think and having his master race and his ideology spread, not just in Europe, but around the world, I think we're really looking at a conflict between, free people and authoritarianism and this fascist idea and the horrors of that fascism and of racism that was going on in Nazi Germany. And we have to really sit back and look at how good men fought back against it, and free people fought back against it. And that is something that, the nobility of the common man came to one of its greatest crescendos, where people really stood up and fought for what was right, and fought for people who had no one to fight for them. And we truly stood at a moment in time where good was fighting evil, and we were talking about how we would govern ourselves from around the world. And the nobility of the common man was put to the test, and it prevailed brilliantly. And we liberated the oppressed, people who had no one to fight for them, and were truly beaten down. So we can say that the war started in World War II on many different points and many different times along a timeline. I suppose maybe the real question that we have to ask ourselves is, not that when will the war start? Because I believe it's already started. The question is, how far will it go? How far will it escalate? That is something that I believe that is the question of where we are right now. And I think more and more leaders around the world and more people around the world are becoming accepting of that principle. And I believe that the topic for today is, and really the thrust of what I want to talk about, is acceptance and denial. I believe that we all would like to be in denial. And no one has been in more denial than Europe for a lot of years. And the proverbial ostrich with their head in the sand, but they are beginning to wake up to it. And we have seen the French president, as a matter of fact, and the French head of their military, has come out and said that we can no longer afford denial, and that they are a target of Russian aggression, and that those asymmetric actions by Russia have already started in their country. And we have seen this in other countries in Europe, too, who are talking to their societies about this. I've previously talked about Sweden, I think Denmark. There's a couple others who are, the Poles, without a doubt, are out there aggressively building their military and aggressively being real about this. The threats are real. The Baltic states are certainly fearful, and they have a right to be, and they're doing everything they can to bolster their societies to prepare for an attack, and I think they're in the front echelon of any conflict with Russia. Everyone is preparing. Everyone is beginning to very realistically talk about this in Europe, and I think we can also look to China and say, look, China is making very strong war clouds against Taiwan, but also threatening its neighbors like the Philippines and others, looking to dominate the South China Sea and really drive the U.S. from that. There's no little doubt we've seen a very hot war in Israel, in the Middle East with Israel and Iran. Many of Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and a few others have been pretty well taken off the table at this point. Iran has been pushed back onto its back foot, and has certainly been, I wouldn't say removed from the table, but it's certainly been put in check. They have to make some tough choices now. So, backed by the United States, Israel has done a good job of mitigating the threat in the Middle East, but we still are a long way from peace there, and I'd like to see us do better. And I know our administration right now, the Trump administration, is actively working on that, which is a good thing. And we do have a hot war in Europe with the Ukraine, which has led to many of the fears in Europe, but still, there's a possibility. I know the Trump administration is actively working on peace there. And I think we can be hopeful that what I think many may call the Trump doctrine of peace through mercantile and getting business out there and doing trade and gaining more fair trade practices around the world can lead to peace, and that these conflicts are not necessary, and maybe downplaying some of the old ideas of a new world order and kind of coming up with a better world order might be more in hand. So I think that these things, there's a lot in play that hopefully will keep us from getting to this point where we have to do that. But there is still a major concern that we have to consider in this, and that is that the bond between China, Russia, and even Iran in this is one that is not just founded on, gee, I'd like to take over Ukraine or something like that. This is expansionism, yes, but it is also a desire to have a war. They wish for conflict, and right now Russia is building up its military machine in the face of its poor performance on the battlefield. What everyone believed was the Great Russian Bear turned out to be the Keystone Cops, and now but they are rebuilding. We shouldn't underestimate their ability to do that, and their ability to work their war machine, build up resources, build up materials, and prepare for a larger conflict. And I think Russia has come to the point where it believes that if it is going to win in Ukraine, it is going to have to face NATO on some level. And that is where we are heading. And NATO must also realize that it cannot, if it is going to keep Russia from taking over Ukraine and expanding further into Europe it is going to have to face dealing with Russia on some level because Russia doesn't seem to be backing down. But the larger conflict here, the larger purpose for these countries, particularly China and to some degree Russia, is that they are hoping to unseat Western control of the world order. They want to knock the United States out of this game. They want to knock our Western allies out of this game and basically install their own government and their own form of things, in authoritarianism, let's just call it what it is, in its place. And that's not really something that we're very excited about and we should be fighting against. I think many Americans are suffering from denial. I think a lot of people around the world have been suffering from denial about this. And I think we have to look at our own society when we really talk about getting out of this denial, because this enemy has entered our shores on a couple of different levels. Yes, many people have come into this country. I know there's lots who want to come to this country and willing to come here illegally, who simply look for a better life. But unfortunately, in the last 4 years particularly, we have seen an influx of people who have come into this country of, military-age men coming from countries like China, Iran, places like this, clearly who are not here just to make a better life for themselves. And there are people from the cartels, gangs out of Venezuela and other places who are coming to this country, they're integrated with each other, they're clearly being supported, and they are not here to do us right. They are here to do us wrong, and they mean harm, and they mean to undermine American society. And I believe they're being supported in this because they will undermine American society. The fentanyl, the bringing of just unbelievable amounts of fentanyl into this country is beyond frightening. It's shocking, and that it's being allowed without aggressive action, and which we are seeing now, but in the Biden administration was just shocking. I mean, the number of young people who are just needlessly dying from this, just people in general who are dying from this, and the threat to the rest of our society from it is just mind-boggling. And it's important for us in such times to really enforce our borders, not just because we want to be nationalistic, but because we need to be secure in a time when there is a great deal of threat. We've seen riots in our country, and that's not necessarily anything new. Our political discourse sometimes wears on our shirt sleeve, and people get a little over-enthusiastic. And we all have seen it before, and we know what it is, and, we move on, and like I said, we wear it on our shirt sleeve, and we get on, and hopefully we do better, right, from it all. But that's not really what we're seeing now. We're seeing conflict that's well organized, especially in these far left cities, where we're watching almost insurrection against government authority and government agents. Remember, this is not a fight for what we believe is an injustice, where a law was recently passed or a regulation was placed in or someone clamped down with like a martial law or something like that, and it was totally out of line to serve some authoritarian purpose against people. I know they try to spin that, but we have to remember that's not what's happening here. People were allowed into our country illegally, many of them very dangerous, and we have long-standing laws. This is not a new thing. This has been the law for a long time. It's been enforced by presidents since the beginning of our founding of our country. It's nothing new. And our federal agents are trying very hard to do this right for our benefit because these people can be dangerous. And it seems to me we have to look at that no longer as being just some social uprising, but we need to understand that this is a coordinated effort and that people within our country, citizens in our country, have given aid and comfort to this movement and to this ideal of what is really an insurrection against the United States government and its authority and the laws of this land. And that's really kind of take you back. It's not an aggressive construing of the law. It is just a very plain black and white ideal. And I think that we really are seeing something going on here that we've never really dealt with before. And we have to see some of these attacks for what they are. These people are shaping the battlefield, the future battlefield. They're creating conflict within our country on a level that really is a little horrifying. And it's setting a precedent. This also included attacks on Jewish students under the guise of Palestinian, rights and everything else. If you want to protest for the Palestinians, I think that's great. I don't necessarily agree with you, but okay. But going to the point where you harm other people or really take an anti-Semitic stance against Jewish students and Jewish people, and you're making uprisings in our country and you're harming people, that's not acceptable. That, again, is going back on insurrection because it is a total violation of the sovereignty of the Constitution of the United States and people's rights in this country and their right to religious freedom and other right to free speech and other things. And their life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, if nothing else, to simply go to school and better themselves in life. And one of the great principles of America, has always been that people have come here, whether you were, any race, color, creed, whether you were any religion or anything else, you could come here. In America, we live next door to each other. We don't usually get in too big of fights with people. People have barbecues together, right? We go to the mall together. We do things like this, We raise our children together. They go to school. And sure, there are sometimes frustrations about things, and we want to make things better for some. But on the all in all, we are a great melting pot. And when we attack, students because of their religious beliefs or their heritage, we attack other groups of people, we're really attacking that ideal in our country of the great melting pot. And we are attacking our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is an insurrection idea. Let's make no question about it. We have long crossed off one of the fine lines that in our society where we are allowing people to really, really go and harm others in the name of this. And I don't believe it's just about harming someone for the sake of taking, worrying about the Palestinian movement or something like that as an example. It's really more about going out there and just creating havoc and upset and creating some disorder in our society, which we continue to try to deal with as a free society. And I think this all leads to a point for me in our country that we have to start seeing some of this not as a social disorder or some, okay, they're mad, let's just hear their grievances and let them get it out of their system kind of thing. This is a very, very well-organized and well-funded, apparently, movement in our country. And its design is to undermine the rule of law and undermine the authority of the government and divide this country and to create havoc. And we've seen federal agents fired on for not much more than doing their job and trying to really enforce the law here. I mean, there have been times I've seen some things, and I've even talked about them in some of these podcasts, where I think the government and federal agents went too far. And I think that we have to be careful about that, and our founding fathers gave us the ability to push back on that. And we talked about, the ballot box and Frederick Douglass's basis of our rights in the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. We also talked about the soap box and maybe even the coin box. But we are not talking about that type of situation. We're talking about something where we are not, I'm not sure these are just social disorder where our law enforcement can cope with it. We are talking about something that really requires a much stronger interpretation and something that our society isn't really used to. And it's a very hard line. So we have to get our head out of denial and start looking at these people for what they are and start calling it what it is and start dealing with it as really an enemy force and start putting it in its place. Because if we don't, if war breaks out on the externally, we will have to deal with them internally while dealing with them externally. And that's a tough nut for us to crack, but it's not impossible. But it will happen, but it's probably will end up in a more horrific format. In the book, and my friend Bear, who's the lead character in the book, he gets caught off guard on this. And I take a step back for him, and then I want to get back into this topic where Bear kind of gets into this idea that, he's caught off guard. The war comes to him quickly. It's been brewing for a long, long time, but the actual conflict comes to the shores, comes upon him and everyone else in the country very quickly, rapidly. And he is unprepared. He has, he has food and some other things, but he's living his life, and he's getting a little older. He's looking down the road towards retirement and kind of the good life, right? He's worked hard. And he finds himself being forced out of his home and having to retreat. A lot of people roll back towards the center of the country, or at least away from the eastern cities, coastal cities. And living outside of Philly, he pulls back and ends up finally, after heading a little further west, he comes back and ends up in the Lancaster area, which he makes his base of operations. But he knows that he's been caught, and everyone else in this country has been caught off guard because they've been in denial and they haven't been ready, and they really put him on their back foot, and it takes time to start rebuilding. And he starts to push back, and there's still a division in this country for him. There's this mindset of the far left and big government, and then some of the ideals that we are founded on in our Constitution. And they are in conflict, outright conflict, and they really have to push and pull on each other. And eventually the body of the American people have to come, and the government have to come to resolution, and they do. And they ends up pulling it together. But they deal with this, but it is an awful time in this country, and it brings a very difficult thing for a lot of people to understand that we are fighting each other, and we are fighting a movement that, for wittingly or unwittingly, is giving aid and comfort to the enemy. And both are true, wittingly and unwittingly, giving aid and comfort to an enemy that has attacked us. And they are more interested in disarming, forming militia movements that are pushing back against a small invading force, a large invading force, than they are interested in dealing with that invading force. That keeping control, having big government control, is far more important than dealing with that enemy. And that makes no sense to anyone, right? Particularly Bear. So he pushes back on this. Well, this is a fictional story, and I would encourage you to read the book, but it's not important for this podcast. I want to touch on other things. It's a good yarn if you like that type of thing. A little dystopian reading, but action and political intrigue. I think it's also a warning to our society, and that we can no longer afford to live in denial. The time to prepare for this has long been at hand. And we're going to talk a little bit more about different aspects of preparedness in later episodes. There are many levels of preparedness, and each person should take stock in how they can and would prepare, and prepare for different scenarios and different thought processes, so they've got their head around it for their family. And I know a lot of people have already done that, but it doesn't mean we can't revisit it or become comfortable. But to live in denial and think things can just work themselves out, and that this type of thing can't happen here, and that our society is cast in stone, is a fool's errand. History has proven that not to be true throughout history and time. While we should always look towards peace, and I have to reiterate this, I really am strongly supportive of the Trump administration's peace efforts, and also peace through strength, which I think they're very aggressively working on, and I think that's great. We should be clear-eyed about the nature of what's happening in our society and around the world. And this effort is coordinated, both foreign and domestically. We've long passed normal political discourse, the types of things I grew up with over many decades, long gone. Where people just bantered back and forth. They had very strong feelings about political ideas and certain directions and laws and things like that. But as Ronald Reagan put it, at 5 o'clock on Friday, we're all still Americans. And that was an important ideal that we always worked on. And we seem to have lost that. And somewhere's in that lack of political discourse, this new supercharged hate that we see in our especially from the far left. We seem to be wittingly or unwittingly giving aid and comfort to our enemies. And not because we have political discourse, but because we are opposed to American society. We must work to be more unified in the face of what's coming. We must not let these people deal with it. And this is why I say we must be prepared to look at what some of the going on in our society as insurrection. We must look at it as a coordinated effort and use the resources of our government and our people to hunt this down, break it up, and not allow it in our society so that we do not have to deal with it, and so that we can continue to build a consensus within our country and stand unified against external enemies. We don't need internal enemies. But some of this is going to be carried on into future episodes. So I kind of want to reach a conclusion on some of this and talk about a couple of things and maybe reach back over a couple of things we've talked about. The hour's grown late, and we have much to do to prepare for what potentially lies ahead. Most importantly, the courage of free people must not falter. We have always come together in our dark hours, and this time is no different at all. We must strengthen our resolve through our faith. Always been a founding principle for us and always been an important part of who we are. Never should our faith be an excuse to fail in courage or retreat from our moral imperatives. And this is why I wanted to call bull on some of the original, what I said earlier. Our faith is not meant to be a sword against our fellow citizens or our fellow man. It is meant to be a shield against evil, and helping to bring people to Christ's confidence, and also to give them courage in times of need. Many believe that the fulfillment of the revelation is at hand, imminent, and that the return of Christ is here. That would be wonderful. But we must always stand strong to defend our liberties, particularly in how they apply to Christ's covenant. We cannot just simply accept that Christ is coming. We must always be prepared to defend Christ, our right to be in his covenant and to practice our faith, to walk the journey of faith and citizenship freely. We must walk in the footsteps of our founders. We must walk in the footsteps of our fathers and our forefathers who have carried that cross and given us the world they have given us. And we must stand strong to give a better world for our children. We must never, never just simply hide behind our faith. That is not faith. That is just cowardice. And our faith was never about cowardice. It takes great courage to be a Christian, and we should show it. We should never allow our faith to divide us from others who are also founded in love, no matter how small or misguided that ember is. We must always nurture it and bring them to us, bring them into this fold. We must put some of our great judgment aside to the favor that there is a greater good and there is a greater evil. Never should we become so arrogant in our faith that we cross the line that becomes so absolute in understanding of God's word that we see ourselves as God's word. Let us always love each other, which is the basis of real strength. Let us stand firm against those who are founded in hate, the authoritarian, the Marxist, the communist, the fascist, and the minions like Antifa, radical Islam, and so many others, remembering this is not a social issue, but a war for free society. And kind of in conclusion to this, I want to read a piece from the book, and because I think it sets a nice tone, or sets a tone for the book, and I think it sets a tone for this opening salvo for this larger topic. So this is the preface from my book. This is a story that has been told throughout time by many different people. We remember their stories by how these civilizations lived and perished, the choices they made, and the values they endeared. In this story, there is one great difference. This story takes place in our time and considers many of the choices that have been laid at our feet. For in our time, like many who have come before us, our choices have the potential to shape the destiny of our world. We are once again caught in a great divide where many pressures are fostered a reconsideration of how we can or should proceed. We must consider where these pressures come from, what makes them important, and the consequences of our actions. To this end, what we see in the mirror should cause us to take stock in ourselves, lest we blame the mirror, which is the ultimate expression of vanity. While this is a story of what may be or could be, we should not dismiss the very real consequences of our passions, considering what we have gained as opposed to what we may surrender. For as is true with each individual, so is true of a great society. To whom much is given, much is expected. Finally, I will leave you with this warning. Beware of those who would dismiss this tale and proclaim its impossibilities. Beware of those who tell you these things cannot happen here or today. Remember that while the participants in the particulars may change, this tale has already happened. It has happened here, and it could happen again tomorrow.